What good is it, my brothers, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can that faith save him? If a brother or sister is poorly clothed and lacking in daily food, and one of you says to them, "Go in peace and be warmed and filled," without giving them things needed for the body, what good is that? So also faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. But someone will say, "You have faith, and I have works. Show me your faith apart from your works, and I will show you my faith by my works." You believe that God is one? You do well. Even the demons believe and shudder. Do you want to be shown, you foolish person, that faith apart from works is useless? Was not Abraham our father justified by works when he offered up his son Isaac on the altar? You see that faith was active along with his works, and faith was completed by his works. And the scripture was fulfilled that says, "Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness, and he was called a friend of God." You see that a person is justified by works and not by faith alone. And in the same way, was not also Rahab the prostitute justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out by another way? For as the body, apart from the spirit, is dead, so also faith, apart from works, is dead.
The other day I was reading an article on the internet, or rather I just saw a tag saying how to roll up your sleeves. Apparently most people don't know how to roll up their shirt sleeves. Well, I confess I didn't read it, I didn't have the time, but I also planned to read it because, like you, I think I'm probably a little interested in that because it seems obvious, but also because I care about how I look. I mean, one of my small groups is called Handsome Thursdays after all, so I have to keep going with that and make sure I know exactly how to roll up my shirt sleeves. That kind of website's not weird today, is it? There are news stories, websites, Pinterest, Facebook sharings, TV shows that are all dedicated to how to. Sometimes we call them life hacks. You know what a life hack is? It's one of these little tips, this little shortcut to get around things that get in the way of your day. We love how-to stuff and tips and life hacks. It's almost addictive. I can't tell you how many of them I read and think it's really neat and then tell people about it and then never do it. But I think it's neat because it actually forms part of the notion of what us modern Americans think of as the good life. I used to ask college students when I'd lecture in theological ethics courses and environmental classes, I'd say, "What is the good life?" Shockingly, their answers were quite modest. I mean, I would think from a bunch of college kids, you would have some kind of reiteration of a hip-hop video. You know, fancy boat, beautiful people, crystal, jewels, fancy clothes. No. What these college kids kept saying over and over and over was, "Well, I'd like to be able to graduate from this university, get a job to pay back my student debt, and then hopefully have a nice job that doesn't lay too much claim upon my life. You know, a job where I can have a family, live near friends, have a house, have a reasonable amount of nice possessions, but mostly just to be happy with friends and family." How-tos and life hacks and tips are kind of helpful, I guess, in people's imaginations. They're pointers to get to the thing that we want most of all. And I think that's why people like them. In short, you could call them practical knowledge, practical wisdom. There's a type of person who really goes in for practical wisdom. I think it's the kind of people who like the book of Proverbs and the book of James. You see, James is the closest thing in the New Testament we have to wisdom literature. You know wisdom literature best by the Proverbs. It's short, witty, aphoristic phrases. Sometimes they're really punchy. They hit you right in the nose and they tell you what to do. There's very little metaphysical imagination there. There's very little theological depth or at least questioning. No one's thinking about the rhetorical things. They're just kind of saying, here's what you should do, here's what you shouldn't do. This is smart. Listen up. James is kind of like that for the New Testament. It's low to the ground. It puts its feet firmly on the ground. And when you read James, sometimes you just get a nice little how-to manual or here are things that you need to do. There are some people who really go in for a book of how-tos. I wonder if that's you. It certainly wasn't Martin Luther. Martin Luther hated James. Let me just say that one more time. Martin Luther hated the Epistle of James. In fact, if he had his way, he would have cut it right out of the Bible. When he translated the book, the New Testament into German, he actually put James at the very end after Revelation, all on its own, and he called it the Epistle of Straw. The Epistle of Straw. It has no foundation. It's weak. It crumbles. Why? Because of what Brother Beaumont Howard just read. James declares that you can prove a person's justification by works. Oh, and Luther didn't like the idea of works or deeds or merits very well. And I don't want to be too harsh on Luther. We have to remember a few things about him. First off, he was a medieval monk who didn't like himself very much. And as somebody who sometimes goes through bouts of not liking myself too much, I can tell you it's pretty easy to think about the goodness of God and go, I'm not worthy. But for people in his day and his era, they wouldn't shy away from physical self-abuse, at feeling just absolutely worthless before God. And they think they needed to do things like self-abuse or abstaining from food for long, long periods of time just to get into God's good graces. And let's not forget that Martin Luther also lived in the unfortunate time, in the unfortunate place where clerics were selling forgiveness for money. You want to be forgiven of your sins? Scared about your ancestors' sins? Go ahead and give me a little extra money. We'll build our building, and I'll tell you you're forgiven. These abuses really upset Luther. For him, no, you can't work your way into God's good graces. You can't merit your way into the love and embrace of Jesus Christ. So he found solace in St. Paul's epistle to the Romans and Galatians, where Paul says, you are justified by grace through faith. But we just read in James where he talks about being justified, in a sense, through work. So what's the deal? It's the reason why Luther hated James. He was in the abstract. He liked metaphysical meanderings. He loved to sit in the pub and debate theological questions. He wasn't so interested in bake-selling your way closer to the good Lord. You needed to know and believe the right things. There are people, I think much like Luther, in the style of Luther, who maybe because of their life circumstance or maybe because of something they've been told, who elevate the notion of faith and belief to the diminishment of their work. I was once at a car dealership visiting a friend who worked there, and he called over another car dealer and he says, hey, my buddy Jared here is a bit of a theologian. Tell him that one thing you were talking to me about, that one thing about how you can do anything and go to heaven. And I'm like, oh gosh, why do people do this to me? Throw me into a little argument like it's not a very good position to be in, let me tell you. You don't make friends that way. So the guy says, well, Jared, what do you believe about once saved, always saved? The technical term in theological circles is called the perseverance of the saints. And I just looked at him and I said, well, I don't much believe that, thank you. I said, I believe that it's true that we have to actually willfully turn our hearts to God. And I believe that it is true that over time we can continually to willfully turn our hearts away from Jesus Christ. Now, I don't think, church, that any sin you commit takes you out of God's good graces. Nor do I think a couple of them. But I think it is possible for us to say to God, no thank you, I've had enough. I will go on my own way. Now, the man rejected that, and we had a little bit of a back and forth, and then he went off to do his work, and I looked at my friend, and I slugged him in the arm, and I said, why'd you do that to me, you jerk? You made me look like a jerk. And he said, get this. And here's the kicker. He said, that man tells everyone about Jesus on the car lot, goes to church every Sunday. He's rather obnoxious about his faith, but the truth is he actually cheats on his wife every week. And he said, that man I've talked to about it. I've said, hey, brother, you can't be doing this. And the guy had all kinds of answers to that. But when my friend got in his face and said, listen, aren't you afraid of walking away from Jesus? The response the man gave was, no, I'm sealed in the book of life. I'm saved. I have faith in Jesus. I'm saved. I can do whatever I want because I'm in. there are some people who have taken Luther's concern to the extreme and said, hey, it is not a matter of what you do, but it's a matter of what you believe. Believe the right things, say the right things, and you are A-okay. Some people don't like James, where he gets down in your kitchen and asks what you've been doing. Where he gets down on your level and says, hey, have you rolled up your sleeves lately and done something about your faith? There are other people, though, who absolutely love James. One of my closest friends, Clint Dixon, he absolutely is enamored with the book, hasn't nearly memorized. I brought him to volunteer with me in my teen ministry, and then he decided to become a youth minister, and he went to college, and then he took over for me when I stepped out of the youth ministry. And he's still doing that to this day. And he teaches every teen that comes to the youth program the book of James. And the reason why he told me was, he said, Jared, James is a book I can get my hands around. Like I said, no one's in a pub debating the book of James. No one's debating what he says. No one's questioning its theological significance about what it says about certain doctrine. It gets right at the heart of rolling up your sleeves style Christianity and tells you what to do. Get your hands dirty. And he liked it. Reminds me of our other friend, Willard Widener. He's 85 years old, and he's nearest thing I have to a grandfather. Willard was an elder at a church I served before coming to you. Each winter, Willard joined me and about 24 other Christians at Denny's at 6 a.m. on Tuesday mornings to read 3 or 4 theological books. Pretty miraculous, right? 6 a.m. Denny's? Theology? Seriously? Since you're not flabbergasted by that, I expect you all to be with me at 6 a.m. at a local place here in Midtown this winter. I'll be on the phone to call you to tell you about your books. At any rate, about once a month, I could count on Willard to try to pull us in like a person flying a kite, bring us back down to earth. We would be questioning the metaphysical assumptions of Trinitarian this or that. Yes, I'm using big words because that's what we're talking about. Sometimes we would question the free market and was it really a free thing at all, and what did it, and we'd talk on these high ideas. And he would say, well, guys, I just want to remind us once again about Odessa French. Odessa French. I must have heard her name every year for the 5 years we did it, at least 20 times. He said, yes, God's complicated. If we fully understood God, he wouldn't be much of a God. But I want to remind us all, he said, that the gospel needs to be understandable to people like Odessa. You see, in his previous church experience, there was a simple lady named Odessa. I don't know what disability she suffered through, but she didn't know much about the persons of the Trinity or that Jesus is one person with 2 distinct natures. But she did know that Jesus got on his hands and knees and washed the feet of disciples. And she knew that she could do that too. It was a rather annoying reminder from Willard every now and again because we knew that, but we were there for speculation, high ideas. But it was a good reminder. Bring us right back down to the ground, reminding us that, hey, this faith that we call Christianity is not just about what you do in a library, but it's about what you do when you roll up your sleeves. There are people like Luther who hate James, and there are people like Clint and Willard and Odessa that love James. What about the demons? The demons, my friends, they hate it. Did you hear what Bo said when he read James? James reminds the Hebrew Christians that he's writing to. He's saying to them, so what? You believe that God is one. Let me remind you of something for a moment. For the Hebrew people, they had to believe essentially one thing. And they had to do essentially one thing regularly. I know we tell a story about how they had a law and had to fulfill this law stuff. But basically, they were to impress upon their children and write it in their clothing and write it on the doorpost of their homes and talk about it when they walk and talk about it when they lie down. They were supposed to say this thing: Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. Distinct, different from all the other gods. Know that. Declare that. And so James is telling these Hebrew people who know that, who have said that, who have professed that, who believe that, who have faith in that, in their core. He says to them this thing, so what? You believe that? Big deal. You believe the right thing. Big deal. So do the demons. Here's the difference. The demons don't let that truth have claim on their life. The book of James says, have faith, believe in truth, but truth leads always to love. You see, the book of James tells us that your faith ought to have some legs. It tells us that faith is not about us being floating brains that just think things and say things rightly, nor are we brains in vats, but rather our faith is in a lived, embodied experience. It's got flesh on it, friends, and when it does itself right, it rolls up its sleeves and it gets to work. Faith and works aren't two different things. Faith equals faithful. When you're being faithful, you're doing the work of your faith. Faith is the why of your life. And people don't care about your why until they see what you're doing. They see all your whats, all your deeds and activities. Might look peculiar from time to time. But when people see that what, they want to know why. See, your what and your why are intimately linked, just like your faith, just like the fruit your faith produces. When we get down to the milk and the coconut, as my old preacher used to say, we really have two types of people in public life I think you can be. The one are the culture warriors. I think that this is telling us not to be culture warriors. We know what culture wars are like. There's pundits on the TV who espouse certain things. There are politicians who align themselves with certain groups and churches and have uniquely positioned photographs in the right place at the right time. Funny how that happens. But friends, no one remembers the people who talk without the walk. I mean, here's what I remember. I remember family-based politicians who cheat on their spouses. And I grimace. And I wince. I remember the pro-environmentalist people who have the worst environmental record in their own home. And I gag and I wince. We are all stupefied, sickened by audacious, in-your-face hypocrisy. Friends, we don't need a bullhorn. We don't need more airwaves on TV, television, internet saying what we think. We don't need more Facebook vomiting where you just say whatever you want and hit enter and expect not to hurt people's feelings. We don't need more of that. We need not to be culture warriors as so much as we need to be saints. We need not be just the people who say it, but we need to be the people who do it. May it never be the case that we come into this space and sing the doxology, but refuse to meet the needs of those who go without when we leave the doors. May it never be the case that we gather at the Eucharistic table, the altar, the place of unity, and then go out of here disunited from one another because we're too busy hating one another or the other Christians down the road. May it never be the case that we come into this space and hear a sermon and think, boy, that was entertaining, and then go out and leave orphans to be orphans. May it never be the case. Friends, we don't remember people who talk loud, even though I'm talking loud. We remember people who roll up their sleeves. And when they leave us, they leave a God-shaped hole, a Christ-shaped hole. You've heard a lot this morning about losing our dear one, Betty Howard. The reason why you hear about it, Judy Jones and Mickey Highsmith before, the reason why this community has mourned those losses and talked about them is because they left Christ-shaped holes. It's because they have rolled up their sleeves for this community and in this community. It is because they've impacted your lives because their faith wasn't about thinking abstract thoughts and I have all the right ideas. It was because their faith led them to charity. It led to work. It led them to love. In the case of Betty Howard, as I am told, as a new young mother, she spent hours upon hours upon hours in the nursery. And then when the kids were older, she would feed the whole teen ministry, 70 to 80 kids, hamburgers and hot dogs. That's a lot of food. That's a lot of annoying stuff and annoying times, isn't it? How many of you have ever fed teenagers? It's not easy. She did the work. She was involved in CWF, which is integral to this church's ministry, the mission of the church. It's been the backbone. The women have been the backbone, was her quote, of the church. And when they were fundraising for various missions and ministries and restoration projects and doing all kinds of stuff here at this location and beyond, she thought, hey guys, let's sell some pecans. Colleen and I's first worship service here on a Sunday morning, they were selling pecans. They still do it. We bought too many pecans. She bought pecans and I bought pecans separate from each other. We're still eating pecans. By the way, I love pecans. And yes, that's how I say it. I'm from the Midwest. But for your sake, I'll say it, pecan, okay? Very tasty. But the point of the matter is if it weren't for her, countless lives wouldn't be the way they are. Our own Jim Bell, I know, came here 29 years ago with his wife. It's hard to move across country and start a new job. It was Betty Howard who took them in and made them feel at home. That's the reason we talk about her. That's the reason why we talk about others. To be remembered, I should say, it just comes from rolling up your sleeves and doing the work of faith, not just saying the right things, but also letting those things motivate your life and how you live. I started by talking about the good life. It's funny to me that many people think of the good life and they have the idyllic image of the American dream, suburbia. Nice house, nice wife, husband, kids, perhaps a dog or a kitty, friends, barbecues with the neighbors, maybe your family. It's okay to want those things. I want those things. But the good life for ancient philosophers was a technical term. It meant the life of virtue, a life lived ethically. For the ancient Christians, it meant the life of character, of single-minded devotion to Jesus Christ. You actually can't have faith without work. It is the evidence of the deepest conviction in your heart. No, you can't work yourself into it. But when you're there and you've experienced the grace of Jesus, it begins to manifest in your life. Perhaps we should let it make claim over us now and sing songs, not like, I am my own God and I am my own boss, but songs like, I am thine, O Lord.